Well, I'm joined now by the Welsh political commentator and host of Rich Politics podcast, Richard Taylor. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you, Tom.
Firstly, I want to go through how these vaccine passports came about, because there was a bit of confusion last week when there was a vote in the Senedd whereby one Tory said that he couldn't vote because of technical issues. What went on?
Yeah, well, the vote last Tuesday was significant for Wales because it's going to have huge societal impact now, especially you mentioned the businesses and nightclub industries and large events. As of today, people like myself and many others will be excluded from parts of society based on the fact we don't want to show our medical status. How it came about, however, is more worrying because it brings into question our democratic process. When you consider that a member of the Senedd, Gareth Davies from Clwyd, he was up at the conference in Manchester. What he was doing there, I really don't know.
Well, he's a Conservative member.
He was Conservative.
And was at the Conservative Party
Yes,
conference.
he was. Whether in official capacity or not, I don't really know. But with a vote of such magnitude and the outcomes of this vote, my personal opinion is he should have been in the chamber at least, or remotely. Now, apparently, he tried to access the IT system hybrid voting we have in Wales currently. Again, another issue. Why are we having hybrid voting at the moment when Westminster is back in full capacity? Why is Wales doing it differently? Nevertheless, he couldn't get through, and the presiding officer had a break before the vote went through. There was a break. During that break, she went and tried to phone the member personally on his mobile phone, and she would have taken his vote over the phone orally. Wow. That means if he had said, and he intended, Tom, by all intents and purposes from his Twitter account and social media, to vote against it. So what would have happened on Tuesday hasn't happened, which would have been that vaccine passports would have been, that vote would have been dead in the water.
So that vote passed by one vote?
By one vote. Now, had it gone to a deadlock, what would have happened in how it works in the Senedd? The presiding officer or Speaker of the House in Westminster, the two comparisons, they would have the cast-in vote, and she cannot vote in favour with the government or the motion, which means she would have had to vote it against as well. The surprising thing was to see all the opposition parties, including Plaid Cymru, who normally vote in favour with Welsh Labour, voted against this motion. But as a result of this one, what some have called a technical glitch, I think some responsibility has to lay in both areas. The presiding officer could have delayed the vote. It's been done before in the Senedd, but she didn't do anything untoward. She was well within the right to let it go and say, time is up, which is what she did. But Gareth Davies still has questions to answer. And I don't think this is going to go away. The legitimacy of the vote, because of the impact it's going to have. If I can tell you, a large golfing resort in Wales, a friend of mine who looks after events there contacted me and has told me 2 events this week have been cancelled, and they've lost literally hundreds of thousands of pounds because they're not ready to implement vaccine passports, which is some of the consequences of this ridiculous decision. That aside, the discrimination involved, which I've mentioned on this programme many times before, and the other aspects as well. And I think, you know, it brings our whole democratic process into question, Tom.
No, that's a really fascinating story in terms of how this came about. And it's interesting you mentioned that some events have already been cancelled. Up in Scotland, where they brought in a similar scheme of vaccine passports just a week or two ago, and there were some huge technical errors in terms of the app coming on last minute, people not being able to download it, lots and lots of problems. But there was a grace period then of around a month where this wouldn't be enforced for a while. Is that not the case in Wales?
No, it's not. As of 7 o'clock this morning, it's now been implemented into law. This isn't a suggestion. This is actually a legal requirement, and there'll be fines issued. And I was at the protest on Tuesday outside the Senedd against vaccine passports. And it was interesting. I spoke to a number of police officers there, and the police officer in particular I spoke to said, we don't know how we're going to police this. We've had no information from the Welsh Government. We don't know how we're supposed to respond to reports that come in. I've spoken to the nightclub industry. I know you may have someone on later on today from the association who said it's not practical. I mean, let's be honest, most people go to a nightclub, they've been to a pub all afternoon, they're probably steaming drunk before they get there. Can you imagine the aggression they're going to face on the doors when a bouncer says to somebody, hey, you haven't got a COVID pass, you can't come in. Now, I don't advocate violence, obviously, but you can see where this is going to be very difficult for the nightlife industry to actually impose. And, of course, things like, I'm a patriotic Welshman, as you can tell from my accent. I can't go and watch my beloved Wales play rugby because I refuse to show my medical status. And there are many people in Wales, I feel, that feel let down by this politician in particular, Gareth Davies, because he should have been, let's be honest, if you're at the Conservative conference, there's a huge vote that's going to change society in Wales. And this morning, Matt Drakeford, First Minister, has already said that restrictions, which we still have in Wales, mask wearing in supermarkets, social distancing, is still in place in Wales. I know it's not in England. He has stated this morning he's going to continue this into 2022. So we're still living with those restrictions.
No, it does seem extraordinary. I mean, in terms of a scale of interventions in the economy, I would think that vaccine passports are probably preferable to asking businesses to shut altogether. But the idea that we've reached that stage already is curious, given where we are in terms of the COVID situation in the country. Not an exponential rise in cases, sort of bumbling around, deaths relatively stable. Why is it that the Welsh Labour Party's cancelled its conference? Why are they taking the data to mean something differently than indeed the English? I was at the English Labour Party conference 2 weeks ago. My gosh, there wasn't a mask to be seen. They were singing karaoke together. What is it about the Welsh Labour Party that's so different from the English Labour Party?
I think Matt Drakeford is known as a very cautious man. He's a grandfather figure in Wales to a lot of people, and I've witnessed it and seen it myself firsthand when I've met him personally. And I think that cautious approach is what he's always put into his whole pitch when it comes to, looking after the regulations in Wales and caring for the people of Wales. That's been his pitch. But, that doesn't really help people in Wales, in my opinion. We've had the biggest vaccine rollout in the whole of the UK in Wales. How vaccine rollout program has been huge, and that's a great success for the Welsh Government, and I take my hat off to them. So if we've had such success and immunity now is growing more than it's ever been because people have had COVID and everything else, then surely the introduction of vaccine passports is nothing more than discriminatory, for there's no evidential basis to tell us that it's going to help with the uptake of vaccines. Look at vaccinating children now. Is it 11% of parents have had their 12 to 16-year-olds vaccinated at the moment? This idea that vaccine passports will encourage people to get the vaccine, to me, seems a way of making things mandatory that they say are not.
Well, Rich Taylor, thank you very much for your perspective and that really interesting story and how this all came about. Fascinating politics going on in Wales that no doubt we will keep up with